NanoTek Warrior, a game where you surf a tube. Yeah, it's a tube surfing game. It's like a shoot 'em up, a scrolling shooter, but instead of going from the left to the right or just flying upward, you're like surfing on the tube. I mean, really, you're flying upward, but you're stuck to this tube that's going up, and you can go anywhere on the tube in 3 dimensions, and you can just jump. But the tube seems to have gravity, so like you never fly off the tube. You land right back on the tube. Did I mention tube? Drink every time I say tube, since it's St. Patrick's Day. Congratulations, now you have alcohol poisoning, and we're only 45 seconds into this game review. It's a really unique scrolling shooter, and I like it a lot. You avoid various obstacles, you avoid or shoot the enemies, and the game has a really good strategy when avoiding the enemies because you don't just go left and right. Like I said, you kind of fly or surf in this 3D perspective of the tube. So if an enemy is like on one side of the tube, just like go right perpetually until you're literally on the other side of the world compared to the enemy. Of course, some enemies chase you, some obstacles are hard to actually avoid because they're clumped together really close. So for these obstacles, you can kind of do half a barrel roll where you're flying sideways and kind of eke through, or you can just jump over them. A lot of these obstacles you can jump over. It's just a fantastic game because it handles well and it looks good and it's fun, but it's not overly hard to play. That is, while you're just casually flying. The game does get hard because of how long the levels are and how many enemies and obstacles there are. Like just flying for 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds, you're probably gonna get through that fine, especially since you don't die in one hit. You do have a life bar, and on top of regular weapons, you also have special weapons you pick up, so there's different ways to kill the enemies. But just because how long the levels go, just because you keep running into enemies over and over, you're being bombarded by enemies, you will die a lot in this game. It's like you're some kind of super soldier in the medieval period, a super knight that no man can defeat in hand-to-hand combat, and you fight like one knight, two knight, three knight, and then you start like beating groups of men, but then at a certain point you start to get weary, you start to get tired, and there's just the barrage of enemies is just too great, and you still die even though you're the greatest warrior the world has ever seen. You're Achilles, but even Achilles cannot take on an entire army perpetually going at him. The only human I know of that can take on an entire army's assault is Mia Khalifa. That woman is made out of steel and iron. She has been molded in the furnace of war. She can take on a full frontal, a backward assault. Nothing stands in her way. and ironically, she is a tube surfing expert. But how would this unique shooter compare to other unique shooters, or like, you know what, it's not even the shooter, because most shooters you're flying. In this game you're kind of gliding on these tubes, even though you're still flying, whatever. It's like a mixture. That's why I'm saying it's unique. It's a shooter, it's a scrolling shooter, a gliding game, but also it's kind of an endless running game if you think about it. Even though when this game came out, really, endless running wasn't a genre. That's a genre that really picked up steam with like games on smartphones, and not even flip phones. I don't remember endless running games on flip phones. This is a phenomena that took flight like when we started having normal phones that we have now. You know, these futuristic phones that the CIA uses to spy on us? Those phones. That's the ones I'm talking about. So let's compare this game to a couple of other like games like this or whatever. It'd be funny if I just compared games to games that have nothing to do with it. Like I compared this game to a bunch of like football games and soccer games. Like, yeah, I mean, it's, while in Madden you do have Tom Brady throwing a football, in this game you can shoot robots. So which one is better? Why do I have to compare things to things that are like them? Why can't I diversify, damn it? I actually want to compare this to like running and flying games, not even so much shooting. I don't even care if there's shooting, because this game, if anything, reminds me a lot of free running and just perpetual running games. Now, some of you might not know this about me. Some of you might. I like girls that parkour in Abercrombie and Fitch. And that's why I want to compare this game to Mirror's Edge Catalyst. I loved the first Mirror's Edge, even though it had a lot of problems. Then Catalyst came out. I was so excited, and I played it for maybe a couple of hours, and then my excitement kind of died out. I mean, it's a great game. You like still parkour on city rooftops. You have like races against the clock. There's a story and everything. But at a certain point, all the like parkour and jumping and running, it all kind of became the same. Everything just kind of blended into each other. And I guess you could say the same thing about this game. You know, everything, all the obstacles, all the enemies in every single level, they're just repeating each other over and over. They're just placed in different places. So how do they compare? Even though I guess they're not the same type of game, but they're both, if you think about it, running forward and avoiding obstacles. Obviously, Mirror's Edge Catalyst has better graphics. We're not comparing graphics because it's two games from different eras. Let's compare which one's more fun. I think Mirror's Edge had the distinct advantage of being a lot more fun than this game in the beginning, just because, as I've mentioned, I was a huge fan of the first Mirror's Edge, and the second one came out, and I was as giddy as a schoolgirl. I felt like back, like in my teenage and childhood years when I was a huge fan of Final Fantasy VII, and then Final Fantasy VIII, Final Fantasy IX came out, and I just couldn't wait to run to the store and buy those games. That's how I felt about Mirror's Edge 2. So like the first 30 minutes, the first hour, I had so much more fun with that game than this game. But then it all, like I said, still kind of. Have you noticed how I say "like I said" a lot? Like I've been saying that a lot. But then, what else can I say when I refer to something I said before? As I've mentioned, that's what I'm going to do now. No more like I said. I'm going to go with as I mentioned. That even sounds better. It sounds more dignified. So, yeah, like in the beginning, Mirror's Edge Catalyst was a lot more fun. But I feel like this game will have a lot more replay value just because even though it's repetitive like Mirror's Edge, it's fun repetitive. It's like turn your brain off and play repetitive. This game's repetition is more like those 80s arcades where even though it was, the same thing over and over, just like moving a tiny little dot and shooting other tiny little dots, it was really addictive. That's how this game is. It's a really addictive type of repetitive. So this game, I would say, is slightly better for me personally than Mirror's Edge Catalyst. The second game I want to compare to this game is Bosun X. I reviewed it something like 2 or 3 years ago, and these are very similar games, even though they're in completely different genres, but nevertheless, they're very similar. Like, you're running to perpetually forward, and the only difference is in Bosun X, most of the time you're inside the tube. In this game, you're like outside of the tube in 3 dimensions. But it's basically running forward in 3D and avoiding obstacles. In that game, it wasn't really so much avoiding obstacles and shooting as this game. That Bosun X was more about jumping over platforms. It was a platforming game. I don't even remember. I don't think there was shooting in Bosun X, but very similar play styles. Moving left, right, avoiding obstacles in this high octane, awesome looking, colorful world. And the graphics are very similar as well. Even though Bosun X is a game that's a good deal younger than this game, so that just it really, I guess, says a lot about how good the graphics are in NanoTek Warrior, a game from 1997. Bosun X is literally about 10 years younger. In terms of where I had more fun, this game, I've had more fun with this game, mostly because there's a lot more things to do. In Bosun X, it's pretty much platforming. In this game, there's platforming, avoiding obstacles, and shooting enemies. There's just more content. The gameplay is just as fun, but there's more fun here because there's more content to enjoy. And the last game I want to compare to this one is a game called Raise the Sun, which is pretty much exactly like this game. Very similar games, except in Raise the Sun, you don't like fly around a tube, you're just flying left and right. But other than that, avoiding obstacles and just flying in a futuristic spaceship. Very similar games. Raise the Sun is very different. It's a lot more zen. It's a lot more relaxing experience. It's a smoother game. This game is more about carnage and destroying enemy ships and robots. So while this game is more fun, if you're not in the right mindset, if you're in the mindset to relax versus to destroy, I would say Raise the Sun would be a little better. But overall, this game is better most of the time, because most of the time you have energy. Race the Sun is the type of game you play when you come home and you're just dead tired. It's like 11 p.m., you worked a 12-hour shift, you're dying, you cannot concentrate even on a simple shoot 'em up where you're flying around. You can't take any like crazy shooting. You just want something smooth. Raise the Sun is a smooth, relaxing flying game. This is something you need to play when you have energy, when you've had coffee. This is the game you play to burn off energy. Raise the Sun is a game you play to regain energy. But overall, I think this one is slightly better, even though both games are great. That's NanoTek Warrior, a great game from the mid to late 90s. Really fun, really unique. A little bit too hard, but the parts that you will get to, you're going to enjoy every single moment of those parts. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more classic game reviews. Goodbye, my friends.